It all began on an ordinary Thursday evening, the kind of day that passed without much notice, except for the heaviness in my chest that always lingered after work. I worked as a mid-level project manager at a growing firm in the city, and though the job provided me with a decent living, it drained me in ways I could hardly describe. My boss, Richard Foster, was a man of power, reputation, and intensity. He carried himself like a general, with commands sharp as blades and expectations as high as mountains. Richard was respected, perhaps feared would be a more accurate word, by everyone in the office. He demanded perfection, not only in results but in attitude, punctuality, and even appearance. I had learned to read the shift in his eyes, the twitch of his jaw, the way he tapped his pen against the table when displeased. Most days, I made it through unscathed, but there were days when I felt crushed under the invisible weight of his authority. And then, there was his wife. Her name was Evelyn. I had only seen her twice before that evening, once at a company dinner where she appeared like a vision in an emerald dress, and once at the firm's holiday party when she stood beside Richard, smiling graciously but with an air of mystery that set her apart. Evelyn was elegant, the kind of woman whose presence made people instinctively lower their voices and adjust their posture. Yet, behind that composed smile, her eyes carried something deeper, something like loneliness. It was by accident, or fate perhaps, that I found myself at her doorstep. Richard had asked me to drop off some important documents at his home since he was stuck in a late meeting downtown. I agreed, thinking little of it at the time. His house was not far from mine, a large stone villa that looked like it belonged in a magazine, tucked away behind ivy-covered walls and wrought iron gates. I drove there after work, the folder of documents resting on the passenger seat beside me, rehearsing in my mind how quickly I would hand them over and leave. When Evelyn opened the door, the world shifted. She wore a simple cream-colored sweater and jeans, her hair loosely tied back, strands falling gently around her face. She looked far different from the glamorous woman I had seen at those formal gatherings. She looked real. "Oh," she said softly, her lips parting with surprise. "You must be David." "Yes," I replied, clearing my throat nervously. "Mr. Foster asked me to bring these over. Some contracts he'll need tomorrow." She accepted the folder with a nod, her fingers brushing against mine in that small transfer of paper. There was warmth in her touch, something that lingered longer than it should have. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying a tone that felt too kind for the boss's household. "Would you like to come in for a moment? You must be tired after work." I hesitated. "Oh, no, I don't want to intrude." Her lips curved into a faint smile, and then she asked the question that would mark the beginning of everything. "Why don't you stay a little longer?" It was spoken casually, almost innocently, but there was something in her eyes, a spark, an unspoken invitation, that stirred something restless inside me. I stepped inside. Her home was a masterpiece of quiet luxury, dark oak floors, paintings that seemed too rich for ordinary walls, and the faint scent of lilies drifting through the air. Evelyn guided me into the living room, where a fireplace flickered softly against the evening gloom. "Sit," she said, gesturing toward the leather sofa. "I'll make you some tea. Or would you prefer coffee?" "Tea is fine," I replied, trying to steady the strange pounding of my heart. She disappeared into the kitchen, and I sat there, staring at the flames, wondering why I hadn't politely declined and walked away. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the way her voice softened when she spoke, a stark contrast to the clipped, commanding tone of her husband. When she returned, carrying 2 cups on a silver tray, I noticed how her steps were graceful, measured, as though every movement belonged to a carefully composed symphony. She sat across from me, her hands resting lightly on her cup. "You work with Richard closely, don't you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, taking a sip of the tea. "I manage a few of the bigger projects. He keeps me on my toes, to say the least." Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "He does that to everyone. I sometimes think he doesn't know how to be gentle." Her words lingered in the air, heavier than the steam rising from our cups. It was not criticism, not exactly, but there was a weariness behind it. A glimpse of the life lived beside a man like Richard Foster. I didn't know what to say, so I only nodded. We spoke of lighter things after that, books, films, music. To my surprise, we shared similar tastes. She loved old jazz records, the kind that filled a room with mellow brass and soulful vocals. I confessed my fondness for the same, and she laughed softly, as though delighted by the coincidence. Time slipped by unnoticed. The clock ticked, the fire dimmed, and the world outside turned to shadow. It was only when I glanced at my watch that I realized nearly an hour had passed. I should probably get going, I said reluctantly. She tilted her head, studying me with those searching eyes. Then she smiled again, softly, almost wistfully. Stay a little longer. And I did. That evening became the first of many. At first, it was innocent. I would occasionally stop by with files or updates, sometimes at Richard's request, sometimes without reason. Evelyn would welcome me in, offer tea or wine, and we would talk. Always talk. About everything and nothing, the small frustrations of her day, the loneliness of an empty house, the books she had been reading, the dreams she once had before life became a gilded cage. She was unlike anyone I had ever known. With her, I felt seen, as though I was not merely another employee in a suit, another face in Richard's empire. She listened, really listened, to the things I said. And when she laughed, it was like sunlight breaking through a storm. I began to crave those moments, those conversations. And yet, there was always a line, unspoken but present. A line we hovered near but never crossed. Until one evening, the line blurred. It was raining heavily that night. I had come over at her invitation, not with documents but with nothing at all except a restless pull I could no longer deny. We sat near the fireplace again, the storm rattling the windows, and the air between us felt charged, alive with unspoken truths. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes shimmering with something I could not name. Do you ever feel, she whispered, like you're living someone else's life? Like the world expects you to play a part, and you, just go along with it. Yes, I said, my voice hoarse. Every day. Her hand trembled as she set down her glass. And before I could think, before I could remind myself of the danger, I reached across and took her hand. It was warm, fragile, human. She did not pull away. The silence between us was louder than the storm. Then, with a breath that seemed to shatter something within her, she whispered again. Stay a little longer. What followed was not planned, nor was it reckless. It was inevitable. Our lips met, tentative at first, then desperate, as though years of loneliness had poured into that single moment. The world outside vanished. There was only her breath, her warmth, the trembling honesty of her touch. And in that instant, I knew nothing would ever be the same. Days turned into weeks, and our meetings grew more frequent, more dangerous. We became careful, always careful. Richard remained oblivious, consumed by his work, his empire, his endless ambition. To him, Evelyn was a fixture in his home, a figure beside him at events, nothing more. He never noticed the subtle shifts, the way her smile returned, the way her eyes glowed faintly with life again. But I noticed everything. And I knew, even as I let myself fall deeper, that we were treading on thin ice. That sooner or later, the world would catch up to us. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. We were sitting in the garden, the sun casting golden light across the roses Evelyn tended with delicate care. She looked at me then, her expression soft but pained. David, she said quietly. What are we doing? My chest tightened. I don't know. I just know I can't stop. She closed her eyes. Neither can I. But this is dangerous. If Richard ever found out. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The fear in her voice said enough. But even in that moment, when reason told us to stop, when logic demanded distance, her hand found mine again. And she whispered the words that had become our secret refrain, the words that tied me to her in ways I couldn't escape. Stay a little longer. And so, I did. For love, for longing, for the simple truth that sometimes, life offers you a choice between safety and passion, and the heart rarely chooses safety. I don't know what the future will bring, whether our secret will one day unravel, whether the walls of Richard's empire will close in on us. But I know this, that evening, when Evelyn opened the door, when she asked me to stay, something inside both of us awakened. And once awakened, it cannot be silenced.